We will start again, and welcome back to you, but also, and I'm looking in the camera, welcome to our online audience. I know at least there's some colleagues and friends very close to Justine who is on there. I just wrote to them that we are starting now from our project, but I'm really pleased to be here today to celebrate and hear about Justine Chambers' new book called Pursuing Morality, Buddhism and Everyday Ethics in Southeastern Myanmar. I believe it's also written up here, which is, as I know, because I knew you when you were doing fieldwork in Hpa-an, is based on very serious and extensive in-depth fieldwork among Buddhist Plong in Karen State's capital city, Hpa-an. And it's done during what I usually call the time of the Myanmar honeymoon, when we were, and a lot of us here in the room were able to do ethnographic research in Myanmar during what some people call the democratic transition, some people call it the opening, the political opening, but at least it was a time when both Myanmar people, or a lot of Myanmar people, not everybody, could feel more openness and freedom, and we as researchers could also do the kind of anthropological research. And you are a prime example of how that was possible, as we can read in the book. But I also find that the insights of the book are still very relevant to what's going on today after the military coup, as you also probably will convince us more of today. And at the same time, it's also a really strong contribution to the anthropology of morality and ethics, like the work of Didier Fassin and others who've written on this, and also, of course, extremely important to the scholarship on Karen. And in that respect, I also feel we are really lucky to have, again, Ardeth Maung Thawnghmung come up here and comment on the book after Justine has a go, but also Emeritus Associate Professor from Aarhus University, Mikael, because at least in my view, you are the prime of scholars on the Karen. So how fortunate we are that you could come here, and I know that Justine is also very happy that of all people you will comment on the book. It also shows that she's a very courageous person, because obviously you know what you're talking about. So I'm also very excited to hear your perspective on the book, which I'm also expecting to be different, because you have also researched the Karen in different ways and from different perspectives. I've already introduced Ardeth earlier on, and I think our online audience don't need the long introduction, but at least just to reiterate to the online audience that Ardeth Maung Thawnghmung is professor in political science at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, has published extensively on Myanmar for several years or even decades. And Mikael Gravers, I mentioned, you're Emeritus Associate Professor from Aarhus University here in Denmark, and you have also done extensive research all the way since the 1970s, even before I was born, and you began your research on the Karen in Myanmar. Then you had to take quite a long break, but you continued your studies on the Karen in Thailand. You've also done extensive research on ethnicity, nationalism and Buddhism, published several edited volumes and also books by yourself exploring these dynamics. And then I also have to introduce Justine, who is an anthropologist with a PhD degree from Australia National University. She is also from Australia, but we have, I don't know if we can say stolen her, we have brought you to Denmark, so you're now a researcher here at the Danish Institute for International Studies, and we are working together on the My Climate project on conflict and climate. I get very emotional because Justine is an amazing scholar, and she's published already widely in her young career, but she's also a lot more than that. As you will hear shortly and read in her book, she is also an amazing ethnographer. And I'm not surprised that so many people in Hpa-an and around Hpa-an were willing to share their stories with you. Because you're both a warm and generous person, and you're also a good listener. And you're also good at laughing and having fun, but also to take people's stories seriously. And I think you can't learn that when you study anthropology. That's something you also carry with you as a person to do a good ethnography. And I obviously feel very fortunate to be working with you because of those qualities and because of who you are. And I also don't think it's surprising that you ended up focusing on morality, because You are just a really good person. And I mean, when we were discussing the seminar today, not in this strict sense of following rules, but like just being a nice person to be around. But also I think reflective of that is that you felt really bad last week of celebrating your book because there is this devastating flooding going on in Myanmar, and while airstrikes are also hitting the same people who are affected by these floods. And when you decide to buy a book out here in a moment, the extra money that after the expenses are covered will also go to victims of this flooding. And I think this reflects really well also the kind of person you are. And I also just want to read one of my favorite passages in the book, which is not about your theoretical points, but I think it reflects really well on who you are as a person. And I'm getting older, so now I have to put on my glasses and find the right place. So bear with me. It has been central to my approach to ground my research process in a kind of dialogue, understanding people on their own terms and through their own internal moral debates. Indeed, this book is fundamentally a collaborative effort of critical deliberation, in dialogue with Plong friends, elders and religious leaders, also other academics and scholarship from a range of disciplines. And despite the influence of academic debates, and believe me, there is a lot of theory in this book as well, Justine says, my arguments about morality have their locus fundamentally in the conversations I had with Plong Buddhists, both young and old, from whom I have constantly sought to learn and unpick my own ethical biases and value judgments. Thank you, Justine, and the floor is yours.
Wow, I also feel a little emotional now. Before I begin, I also want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for coming here today, and also to our online audience. I know I have a lot of friends online as well, and I really appreciate all the support. If you can, any of you imagine, writing a book isn't an easy task, and it really, without having a community around you, whether that's family or scholars or friends, it makes a really big difference. My first and greatest debt is obviously to the many Plong Buddhists in Hpa-an who really welcomed me into their lives and generously shared their time with me. But especially I want to thank my student, Sorno Dida, to whom the book is dedicated and who's helped me at various times throughout my research and really shaped my understanding of Plong people and morality as well. So if you're listening, thank you, Sorno Dida. I also hold much gratitude to many friends and colleagues for helping to shape my thinking, but especially to the incredible anthropology community at the Australian National University, where I completed my PhD. And I want to thank especially Nick Cheeseman, anyone who knows him, for his encouragement and advice as both a personal friend, but also the editor of the NU Press Southeast Asian publication series. I also want to thank the rest of the publishing team at NUS Press, as well as the members of the board of Southeast Asian Publication Series who have really actively supported having this work out. I also want to thank the incredible artist JC for designing the cover, and you'll see the cover again in this presentation, which I'm sure, well, I hope all of you love because I do. I also want to say thanks to DIIS, my colleagues in the Peace and Violence Unit, some of whom are here today, for helping me to make Copenhagen my home, but especially to Helene, who is the most amazing colleague, mentor, but also friend, since we first met at a restaurant in Hpa-an. In March 2015, Helene has been a constant source of encouragement and inspiration for my work, and I'm so grateful to work and learn from you in this current project. Spending time at DIIS and working on the My Climate project has really been a powerful learning experience for me and has really further reinforced my conviction of the importance of deeply grounded ethnography and engagement with local scholars. So I also want to say thanks to my amazing team, some of whom are online. Yat Titsa, who's here in the room, Arlene, Tetsin Pine, Nerduda, Siama Meitiri, Siama Sensen for really being this constant source of inspiration, and particularly in how they've all navigated the post-coup landscape. It's been really humbling to be part of that team. Finally, I want to thank my family and my partner Bo, who's also here today. I'm really lucky to have a huge number of people in my life whose ongoing encouragement has sustained and nourished my research journey and the writing of this book. Especially to my mum, who's here today, for always encouraging me to read and to ask questions, to be curious, and most of all, to be open to learning from different people and to value different perspectives of knowing and seeing the world. So, Pursuing Morality is an ethnography of Buddhist Plong people in southeastern Myanmar, focused on the multiple ways they broker, traverse, enact, cultivate, defend, and pursue moral lives. It's full of stories and insights into the lives of ordinary Karen Buddhists, the important role of the Buddhist Sangha, the impact of military violence and long-term conflict, but most of all, the everyday moral quandaries and questions that animate ordinary people's lives. And even though much of what we know and hear about Myanmar, and particularly the Karen, is defined by conflict and violence in this book, and today I'm really going to focus on something a bit different. So approximately 270 kilometres west of Yangon and 150 kilometres east of the Thailand border lies Hpa-an, the capital of Eastern Karen State in Myanmar. For many years, people in urban areas of Myanmar, as well as scholars working on the country, viewed and depicted Hpa-an as a sleepy backwater, a dangerous conflict zone, and even a ghost town. The long-term nature of the conflict between the Myanmar military and the ethno-nationalist armed and governance organisation, the Karen National Union, played an important role in positioning Hpa-an and much of the southeast of Myanmar in this way. Karen people have also been viewed as resistance actors as well as victims of war and state-based violence. However, in my time spent living and visiting Hpa-an between 2015 and 2019, everyday life and conversations were not defined by conflict or military rule. During my time spent with one elder, Pidabu, she would often talk to me about her perception of moral decline among Plo people. With nostalgic reverence for an idealised rural and more moral past, in our monthly discussions over the course of 18 months, she would focus on young people and what she saw as their lack of respect for Plo cultural traditions and an increase in incidents of immoral behaviour. Pidabu would explain to me at length the negative consequences for young women in particular as a result of the high rates of migration to Thailand, often drawing on Plo oral myths that describe the importance of staying in the natal village. As she saw it, the profound and interlocking social and political changes that had taken place in recent years had only accelerated some of these transformations among young people, creating a kind of crisis in Plo moral identity and community life. Conversations such as those with elders like Pidabu, in which she lamented the decaying state of the world, are actually typical of many societies, and particularly those undergoing the kind of metamorphosis that Myanmar was experiencing over the course of the 2010s. However, while I was living and visiting Hpa-an, I came to see that among Plo Buddhists, questions about what it means to pursue morality are a common source of anxiety, consternation, everyday conversation and debate. When I was with young people, I was confronted regularly with various moral dilemmas they faced in coming of age and how they sought to accommodate different interpretations of what it means to be a good or virtuous person. Contestations around moral subjectivity and Plo personhood were also a regular source of conversation among mothers, farmers, school teachers, ward and village administrators, religious leaders, and members of local social welfare organisations with whom I spent time. Whether it was in relation to conversations about failing rice crops, concerns about debt or debt relations, the increasing number of failed marriages and divorce, local politics and the moral leadership of national leaders, or fears about the corruption of lay Buddhist practice, Plo moral subjectivity and everyday ethics were integral and pervasive themes in conversations shaping ordinary life. One of my primary aims when I began my research for my PhD, and ultimately for this book, was to open up a space for the subaltern voices of Buddhist Plo people of Myanmar, who have historically been marginalised from scholarly and historical accounts of the Karen. This endeavour emerges from conversations within Karen studies, and I particularly want to thank Ardeth Maung Thawnghmung for starting that conversation and really creating a space for what she refers to as the other Karen, the quiet majority who lived in Myanmar under military rule. The lack of knowledge about the social and cultural aspects of Buddhist Plong people still remains a significant void in scholarship. The voices of women in particular have been relegated to the position of victims of war and sexual violence. Understandings of morality too have been dominated by the views of members of ethnic elites. I should emphasise that in focusing on Plong people and their everyday pursuit of morality, I do not intend to suggest that there is no sense of a pan-Karen ethnic identity in Hpa-an or elsewhere in Myanmar. Indeed, as I discuss in Chapter 1, the foundational myths of the Plong include a shared history with Bokkenyor-speaking communities who are seen as the father Karen group. Their shared experience of being subjected to violence over the last 6 decades, primarily from Burma military state authorities, also informs a deeply shared sense of connection among Karen communities, particularly those that have supported or continue to support the KNU. However, while some people articulate clear conceptions of morality as a basis for communal identity, the Karen have also undergone significant qualitative changes in the course of their lifetimes, changes that have forced a reformulation and renegotiation of moral lives. I wrote this book in the midst of the global COVID-19 pandemic and then an unfolding series of crises emerging as a result of the 2021 military coup. However, I arrived in Hpa-an at a time when significant changes were materialising in local people's lives. When I commenced research in Hpa-an in 2015, it was a dynamic sociocultural setting with a booming trade sector, an educational hub, and a vibrant civil society. 7 sets of traffic lights were installed across Hpa-an in the period 2015 to 2017. A new state parliament and a modern cinema showing 3D movies were erected. Motorcycles began to dominate the roads in Hpa-an when I did fieldwork, with a growing number of cars ferrying goods to and from the border with Thailand. The ability to make money locally was a further sign of change, with a proliferation of restaurants, clothing stores, phone shops, hotels, and other businesses opening up to cater to Hpa-an's burgeoning consumer class. For young people, opportunities for a future life that would be different to that of their parents now seemed possible. Given the buoyant potential generated by the spate of positive economic and political reforms, when I arrived in Hpa-an, I was interested to find out how the lives of people in a state long affected by conflict and violence were changing, and how these changes were perceived. Was it considered a time of rupture, or was life simply continuing as normal? How had people's expectations and aspirations for themselves and their families changed? However, the more time I spent with Plong Buddhists, watching the ways in which they navigated ordinary life, the more my research came to really revolve around questions of moral subjectivity and an exploration of conflicting notions of everyday ethical practice. This was not simply an intellectual pursuit of my own making, neither was it a matter of a generational divide over what constitutes moral personhood. For many Plong Buddhists, young and old, basic moral orientations and frameworks were, and still are today, becoming ever more fragmented and uncertain in the changing social-political landscape. So after spending time getting to know many people in Hpa-an, this monograph is an account of the everyday lives and understandings of morality within a world of competing values, ethics, and responsibilities. Some of the key questions that animate each of the chapters are: what does it mean to be a good or moral person? What moral principles and cultural and religious norms do people draw from to inform their understandings of morality? What does it mean to practice and embody goodness and morality? How do both local and global discourses fuse with and reshape people's understandings of themselves and their place in the world? By exploring these questions, I provide an insight into the complex moral terrain Plong Buddhists navigate in southeastern Myanmar and the everyday paradoxes they confront as a part of what I refer to as pursuing morality. But what does it mean to live a moral life according to Plong Buddhists in Hpa-an? The term that Plong people commonly use to refer to morality stems from the Buddhist concept of sila. Sila is a Pali concept that refers to the conditions that centre moral life or ethical conduct towards others and society. Pronounced thila by Plong people in Hpa-an district as in the Burmese language. This term commonly refers to moral conduct or virtue with intentional self-restraint or discipline as a key component. Consequently, evil or immoral actions generate demerit and have real material consequences for this and subsequent lives. However, as I discuss in the book, Plong people also have their own understandings and logics around what it means to pursue morality, which sit in conversation with, but are not defined by, Buddhist canonical law. Beyond the Buddhist concept of thila, a series of moral tales and discourses in the Plo language serve to clarify esteemed and derided human qualities. Plo people have strong ideas around the consequences of immoral action, especially related to premarital intercourse, adultery, theft, gambling, economic livelihoods, and inter-village conflict. For many Plo people, morality and goodness are embedded in gendered embodiments of behaviour and dress that stem from local social and cultural norms. For others, moral conduct is embedded in daily economic activities, especially how one chooses to balance earning money on the one hand with one's identity and obligations as a Plo person and a member of the community. As I came to understand it, the logics of Plo Buddhist frameworks of morality requires an intentional and agentive commitment to pursuing morality. This can be enacted through highly ostentatious displays of generosity to the Sangha, but it is also fundamentally located in the substrate of everyday social relations, how we interact with people. To pursue morality does not, however, imply a distinct moral path. As I argue in the book, as Plo people showed and explained to me on numerous occasions, they overlap and draw from each other and sometimes lead people on paths contrary to both self and communal interest. So each chapter examines the lives of Plo Buddhists from a different vantage point and looks at how different moral values, meanings, and expectations shape the dynamics of ethnic and personal identity and the relationships of people with their families, peers, community, and the nation state at large. Part of the significance of this book lies in my emphasis on the everyday and the quotidian. So as Helene mentioned, prior to 2012, gaining access to the social worlds of Karen communities in Myanmar's southeast was extremely difficult, where the history of civil conflict and military rule made it virtually impossible for scholars to conduct in-depth ethnographic research. Drawing on Foucault's notion of subjectivation, I demonstrate that moral agency should not be understood as equally accessible to all actors across space and time. Rather, moral agency is best conceived of as an individual and differentiated, accessible to people in different ways across their lifetimes, depending on their gender, ethnicity, and their position in class structure. Rather than adhering to a singular and coherent conception of Plo Buddhist morality, I argue that people follow multiple moral compasses that do not always point them in the same direction. In this vein, my work contributes to a growing body of anthropological literature that highlights the contradictions and ambiguity inherent in everyday sociality. How people conceive of and what it means to pursue morality is riddled with indeterminacy and doubt, but also involves a certain kind of playfulness. And yet, beneath this playfulness has been the experience of living and surviving in a world where conflict and violent frontier dynamics are ever present. Sorry. While much of the fieldwork for this book was conducted before the 2021 military coup, I think it really helps to think through and understand how ordinary people are experiencing the political crisis today and why so many people have been willing to sacrifice their lives to defeat the military. In the months following the coup, the lives of many people I know in Hpa-an and other parts of Myanmar have changed dramatically in ways which for many has felt like a rupture. The blatant grab for power by military leaders led to massive mobilization and violence, reshaping social life in many ways. However, for many people, questions of morality still remain at the forefront of the revolution and everyday life. And as I discuss in my final chapter, the question of what it means to pursue morality or to be a good person in this particular moment has only become more pertinent. In periods of political unrest and social crisis like that which Myanmar is experiencing right now, people bring to bear their own interpretation of what it means to be a good person. For some of the young friends I describe in the book, the coup not only pushed them onto the streets as part of a massive protest movement to defend democratic ideals, but also into armed revolutionary movement against the military. Alongside thousands of other young men and women across the country who have formed People's Defence Forces to fight against the military, many of these young men and women see themselves as engaged in a battle against evil, fighting for a more just future for themselves and especially for future generations. But particularly in my conversations with people, you often hear people drawing on Buddhist conceptions of what it means to be a just or good person, and also what it means to be a just or righteous ruler. Others have been lucky enough to escape the country and pursue educational opportunities abroad. However, they remain deeply committed to the revolution through online groups and fundraising initiatives, seeing their own education engagement with the resistance outside the country as a means to transform and rebuild a more just Myanmar in the future. Others still strongly believe in the revolution and its goals, but are constrained in their ability to join the resistance or leave the country, and are forced to return to work and learn to live with the regime. Despite the dangers posed by fundraising and organising, many people I've spoken to covertly donate money, food and other necessities to resistance forces. Nanso, a young woman I discuss in Chapter 4 who is now a teacher at a private school in Yangon, explained to me that it is also important for some people to stay in Myanmar, that teaching children and making sure that they do not miss out on educational opportunities, as her own generation did, is also the best thing for her to do right now. For many people, participation in the revolution is part of a moral imperative driven by hope and dreams of the future, both for themselves and for their children and future generations. Their participation is not just an idealistic cause, but fundamental to how they see themselves as a good human. In the context of the February 2021 coup, the question of social and indeed moral obligation continues to be key to people's survival as well, and sense of self. Indeed, many people relate their participation in the revolution in highly moralised terms and frameworks, including a deep sense of moral obligation to the revolutionary movement and the country's future. Plo people's moral obligation towards one another was explained to me by one grandmother as key to understanding of Plo personhood. We Plo, we share everything. If we make curry, we invite our friends and neighbours to come and eat. We are like family. If they need something, we can give it. If they have a problem, we always try to help. We are like family. Partly these bonds are built around relational norms, everyday gift relationships, and the importance of a shared communal identity. However, this shared sense of duty to one another is also deeply embedded in place and is evident across different ethnic and religious groups, as is support for one another in times of crisis. And if anyone has been following the news in Myanmar, the current flooding across the whole country, it's not the government, it's not the military, it's not even, the national unity government that's supporting people. It's their own communities, and it's their own communities that are constantly supporting each other in these times of crisis. While some armed actors are profiting from the political crisis, the majority of people are struggling to survive, and new kinds of moral debates now dominate everyday conversations. One friend that I discuss in Chapter 3 explained that despite the realities posed by inflation after the coup, his parents refused to put up their prices for tea and snacks at their small shop, ultimately making a loss and going deeper into debt because they do not want to add to people's daily economic struggles. But that it is also not part of Plo personhood to profit from other people. In many of the rural villages I've spent time in, people now also take turns to help each other on their farms in the planting and harvesting season so that they do not need to employ daily labourers, a cost that they can no longer afford. Many ordinary lay Buddhists have also turned inward to protect themselves and their families, focusing on everyday moral practice and localised forms of community support in order to ensure their own survival. Religion has always figured strongly in people's response to structural violence and to the harsh economic conditions imposed by the Myanmar military. In keeping with Buddhist ideas, many of my friends and interlocutors view the coup and the current crisis as part of the cycle of suffering, an inevitable consequence of one's karma which one must personally endure. But they also see the current political and economic crisis facing the country as a reflection of the immoral state of the military leaders. In Myanmar, Buddhism does not only provide psychological coping mechanisms to assess people in enduring hardship, it also provides a strong moral foundation to support those in need. In Hpa-an, Buddhist monasteries have mobilised in response to the crisis to provide food and shelter to those people facing economic hardship. In Hpa-an, monks also continue to actively encourage lay people to revitalise Buddhism through social works of prahita, and some monks are also actively engaged with and support the military. The cultivation of these values through everyday social acts, such as collecting donations for the poor, is seen as an embodied form of merit-making par excellence, and thus a means of breaking the cycle of suffering and bringing about peace and prosperity. Acts of dana and infrastructural works focused on making religion also continue in Hpa-an and other areas, with many people drawn to age-old ideas of the importance of reinvigorating the Buddhist Dharma. Some people, like the elders I describe in Chapter 5, see this moment in the history of Myanmar in highly moralized terms as further confirmation of their beliefs regarding the decaying state of the world and the need to cultivate morality for the coming Buddha. Buddhist nationalist monks have also been active since the coup, using highly moralized narratives to discredit and delegitimize revolutionary actors, with some even holding pro-military rallies and events to support the junta. While many people in Hpa-an have turned inwards towards religion and Buddhist ethical codes as part of age-old tactics of everyday survival, the battle lines between those who are actively resisting and those who are supporting or even living with the regime have created an even deeper moral crisis, rupturing local communities, families, and close societies in ways that we will probably never fully understand. Fundamentally, though, the stories encapsulated in this book remind us that behind the current crisis and these narratives of rupture, conflict, there are individuals who sit within these spaces who have different lives and unique worldviews that do not conform to a singular narrative of moral personhood. Indeed, domains of morality are deeply embedded in a complex array of norms, values, historical experiences, and social institutions. The pursuit of morality is fundamentally formed within the substrate of everyday life and how others in society see and relate to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Justine. Thank you so much. That was really great. Yeah, and I'm very excited also now to invite Mikael Gravers, who we've known for a long time, for me since I was a young student in Aarhus. And Mikael has also been following Justine's work since 2015. So Mikael, please, the word is yours.
Thank you. First of all, Justine, I enjoyed reading your book, and it really revived my memory of many discussions in Pukaren and in Skokren villages about morality. I won't say it was a daily issue, but it came up again and again. And your book provides important insights into the lives of Buddhist Karen, in this case Pukaren or Plo. Although you spell it Plong, but they are pronounced Plo. Yes, in Karen state, and the struggle to maintain their customs and moral traditions despite challenges of migration and war, as you described before. I like the way you explain morality by letting your informants tell about their own experiences. And young women, you have many examples, have a special responsibility to uphold morality. And it's important to understand why most Karen people, or at least all those I met quite a lot, focus so much on morality as a core part of their identity as individuals, but also as part of their Karen identity. As you demonstrate, morality is a core ontological concern between generations among Karen. I would like to give an example from my own fieldwork. I spent some time in I think we could call it a hybrid Buddhist community called the Yellow String Karen, because they tie the yellow string around the wrist so that the coming Buddha could recognize them as the pure Karen. And it seems as if all Karen call themselves pure Karen. In that community, the young women, the unmarried women especially, had a very special responsibility. If they had any sexual relations, they had to confess immediately. Otherwise, misfortune would hit the family, but not only the family, but relatives and perhaps the whole community. So they said the tiger might come and bite. And when I said there are so few tigers now, what will you do then? Oh yes, it's very bad. But they kept saying this, yes. And why is it that women has this strong possibility? Maybe you have an answer, but I think it relates to the times when women had responsibility for the sacrifice to the guardian spirits. And this was a very complicated ritual, and if it didn't work, it could mean misfortune to the whole community, but also, of course, to the family. I spent some time in a Skokran community in northern Thailand. They converted only 10 years before I came. And there were still some of them who had this practice of sacrifice of chicken. And it was so complicated. They had to raise special chicken, do a proper ritual, and not just all the women of the household, but their female relatives had to be in the household. Otherwise it wouldn't work. So I think this special responsibility relates to religion, actually. And when you write about moral subjects and you focus a lot upon individual pursuing morality, I think we also have to look into the moral order behind. And the moral order, also in your cases, is very often a religious order. And I would like to take up one of your examples, the famous monk Uttusana. I think I should explain a little about Uttusana. He is a Karen monk who in 1994 managed to split the Karen National Union and draw the Buddhist soldiers out of the Karen National Union organization. Karen National Union is mainly dominated by Christian leaders. And he was not satisfied with the minor role Buddhism had in the KNU. This is a long story, and the other part of this story is that he had contact with the military intelligence and got support from the military after he made this split. But this monk is he was very influential. He died in 2018 in November. And he managed a very strict morality within his domain, but he also used his spiritual powers to dominate other religions. As you write, he evicted Muslims, he evicted Seventh-day Adventists, although some of them actually stayed behind because they shared his ideas of being vegetarians. But then he had a project of building pagodas in order to create peace and unity among Karen. And he managed to construct up to 140 small pagodas around his area. Every pagoda was placed on land he grabbed from other people. And sometime he entered Christian villages and went to the church and started constructing a pagoda inside the church compound. He came at night with an armed guard, and he forced his follower to do the work. he forced them to donate money for the work. And when he died, he had a huge debt, actually, which fortunately was repaid by the military, or I think the poor soldiers, because it was collected by the officers. And whenever he had a Buddhist festival, he asked people also to come and do voluntary work. And you couldn't say no to that, because he also demanded that every follower took an oath. He blessed water, or used a spell, actually, and for the soldiers, it included medicine protecting them against bullets. But when you take that oath, you have to support him. So, I mean, and this kind of land grabbing is practiced by many other monks. You know, you mentioned the Tongale monk, for example. He's very influential, and his mentor is the wife of the former dictator Tan Sui. He grabbed 3,000 acres around his monastery, and Tan Sui managed to provide him with title deeds for the 500, but he actually had to return most of the land. He kept 100 acres. And there are so many other examples where spiritual politics legitimize this kind of use of force, and so I mean, and this is done in the name of Sila. So it's a bit double-sided here with morality, I think. I think I'll stop here, because otherwise we run out of time. I have many more comments and questions, but congratulations. It's a really interesting book. I hope many will buy it and read it.
Michael, I'm sure you will get an opportunity to give Justine the rest of the comments, but these were really interesting ones around gender, but also the paradoxes around morality and the role of these spiritual politics. Ardeth, please, the word is yours.
How about now? Okay. Well, thank you so much. First of all, congratulations, Justine, for this outstanding book. I say it again, outstanding book. Okay, this book is a welcome addition to Burma Studies for two main reasons. First of all, it focuses on Buddhist Korean communities. This is a particular segment of ethnic religious group in Burma who have not received sufficient attention, scholarly attention in the past. Michael's work being the exceptional one. Secondly, there are very few anthropological research on particular community that span over several years. And as both Helene and Justine mentioned, she has spent considerable years and be able to provide us with very in-depth, detailed description and analysis about Korean Buddhist community in Burma. So the book is empirically rich, extremely accessible, extremely informative, vivid, insightful, and engaging. Justine employ a holistic view as well as interdisciplinary perspective of Plong people everyday pursuit of morality through historical, political, culture, and gender lenses. They are manifested in very vivid illustration based on her own observation, conversations with community members, and the stories of individuals. Each story's observation is tied back to her main points, as well as broader argument and theoretical and comparative perspective. So as a consequence of this, the book is highly accessible to readers who know nothing about Burma, as well as specialists on working on ethnic and religious politics, conflicts, and philosophers who study morality and ethnic ethics. An extensive fieldwork in Hpa-an also allowed her to move beyond what people said about morality and focus on how people or Plong Buddhists in Hpa-an actually live their lives. She draws these insights from her observation and interactions, not just with the people from across different ages, gender, socioeconomic background, but also from her interactions and engagements with high-profile, charismatic religious and armed leaders, and also their relationship with their followers and communities members. So here, as she mentioned, she finds multiple and sometimes conflicting understanding of morality among Plong Buddhists, which have been influenced by a complex array of social, cultural, historical, environmental, and economic relations. However, she also sees rooms for agency where individuals are able to reason and to negotiate their own moral codes and to rationalize for themselves what is meant to be good according to their interpretation of collective moral expectations. And these observations allow her to grasp so many contrasting and contradictory aspects of moral pursuits and complex dilemma that exist in individuals, families, generations, peer groups, and communities, and to unpack stereotypical image of Karen as hardworking, virtuous, honest people, egalitarian, and highly moralistic society. So I'm going to mention a few interesting things that I find, and then I want to provide a few feedbacks and questions. So some of these interesting findings include a widespread support among Buddhist populations for the armed groups and individuals and religious authorities who support various religious and cultural projects and who bring peace to the community, despite the fact that their reputation as extractive and coercive strawmen, and despite the fact that they have engaged in exclusionary practices against non-Buddhist religious groups. Another interesting observation from this book is how people who themselves have been oppressed can develop such hostile attitudes toward people who are not part of their religious groups, which is the Muslim, and how young women have been managed to negotiate their roles as modern, educated, independent citizens within cultural and religious constraints. I find these findings very interesting and insightful. So I have 3 questions, feedback, and feel free to respond as you like. But I talked to Helene a little bit, and I think some of my feedback may have to do with the fact that I'm from political science discipline, and you're from anthropology. And I told Helena, we political scientists would like to have a lot of clearly defined boundaries. And then Helen said, we anthropologists like to make everything messy, so and fuzzy, right? So some of my comments probably coming from me being a political scientist. So the first one is how you define morality, okay? The ways in which you define morality and the implications of everyday activities is described in terms of the pursuit of morality. In your definition, is that morality refers to connection between social norms, customs, and codes of being good as Plong people. And your definitions of morality, therefore, includes all kinds of practices. right? Which range from cultural expectations such as filial duties and appropriate roles of women, to something that most people would agree that it's definitely moral and ethical issues, such as the view on killing or adultery or theft, gambling, and drug trafficking. So by including all kinds of activities in your definition, and by implying that people pursue morality in their everyday activities, I think it sometimes is a bit difficult for me to distinguish what exactly are moral and what exactly are not moral ethical issues. So they're all intertwined. And how much of these activities are a reflection, sometimes I wonder, of human nature or genuinely current culture or influenced by Buddhism? So for instance, the concept of filial duties, or the fact that young people are obligated to help repay the debt of parents, are not necessarily current thing. It can be found everywhere among younger generations, especially in transitional economies in Southeast Asia as well as Africa. So that would be my first comment / question. Secondly, the second question has something to do with maybe moral and methodological question. So this is how you were surprised by the Buddhist reactions toward Muslims, right? So I completely understand how outsiders can be confused about their reactions. But sometimes I find that Western scholars tend to dismiss this reaction as exaggerated threat, right? And they tend to dismiss them. So here is the question: how we as outsiders knows that these fears are exaggerated, right? Are we seeing that Buddhist followers were being brainwashed by religious leaders who like to instigate communal violence? To what extent individuals' everyday experiences and encountering with Muslim neighbors play a role in helping form these perceptions, right? So I have talked to many Buddhists in Mon and Karen villages who talks about their everyday experience where, Muslims are not willing to assimilate, or, they have their unique way of worships, or not willing to join the local communities, or there are certain cultural practices, especially toward women, that make some Buddhists feel uncomfortable. So I guess my question is that should we even be surprised, right? The way they react to the Muslims populations, and how do we deal with that? Should we just dismiss them as the fact that their fears are exaggerated, or how do we make sense of it? And finally, in the last chapter and in your presentation, you talk much about the updated issue, and basically the fact that many of the people you have known are they are in support of the resistance movement. And I'd like you to say a little bit about Bochitu, and which you did not discuss in your book. He is the most high-profile leader of Karen armed group that defected from the resistance movement. And recently, and since the coup, he, along with several other Karen political parties, decided to be with, not to fight the military, right? And all of a sudden, now he's in charge of Myawaddy town, and he's expanding his activities. How would people perceive him and the rest of political parties, right? That's a moral dilemma, right? So I wonder. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about, because I was surprised. I have two guests who just visited Myawaddy and who told me that there is a lot of strong support for Bochitu. So if you can, elaborate a little bit about this and tie it back to your main thesis, it would be very helpful. Thank you so much.
So much, Ardeth, and please stay up here. Mikael, will you also join? And Justine, You will have a chance to, I think you should start to respond to Ardeth and Mikael, and then we will open up for questions from the floor as well.
First of all, thank you both for your comments. I feel like I have lots of thoughts in my head, and I definitely want to talk more with you, hopefully, after this event. I'm going to start with the question around Bochitu, just since you just mentioned it. Anyone who works on Myanmar, but particularly in the southeast, knows Bochitu. He is often perceived as a, I guess, corrupt, evil kind of Karen military leader that has sort of taken advantage, particularly of the current situation. But he, there's lots of research and evidence that shows for a long time he has sort of been pursuing his own economic interests over and above the, I guess, concerns or not really sort of contributing to development in the areas that he lives. But I guess, so I think one of actually the way I sort of came to thinking about like the complexities of morality in this book was partly through thinking through armed leaders and strong men like Bochitu. And so I talk about a strong man in the book, but Bochitu actually, I would say, is quite similarly perceived. And so I've spent a lot of time in Bochitu's home village, and I was actually only recently there in February this year. And he recently created this huge pagoda, and it's millions of dollars. And, from the outside looking in, it seems crazy that you've got someone spending all this money and getting donations on this huge project in the midst of this sort of civil war, while most people are struggling to survive. But speaking with people there just recently, but also in the past, there is a really strong sense that he is dedicated to, I guess, spreading religion, ensuring the Buddhist Dharma, and in that sense, potential peace and prosperity in the future for Karen people. I don't think but I think like what I talk about in the book is that it's never black and white. And so on the one hand, you have these strong men like Bochitu who do these really ostentatious donation ceremonies, and they get a lot of merit and good karma from this. They also have very close relationships with powerful monks, alongside obviously military leaders, but they're often on display. But even talking with KNU armed leaders, they've often said to me, Bochitu is really smart. He's one of the smartest guys I know. He's always playing both sides. He knows how to play both sides. People themselves see that as well. But he also does a lot for the communities he lives in. They have good roads. In his home village, it's basically been protected from violence. It's been protected from conscription. I went there and it was totally fine. Everyone was like, welcome, like you're totally safe here. Bochitu loves you. And when I met him, I also had quite a nice interaction. And generally people, see him, like he does things like he does donation ceremonies for elders where he gets down on his knees and gives them money, and he's constantly sort of displaying this like moral self but that doesn't mean that people don't know that he engages in these other acts of violence. But I think that's what's interesting, in that like you can both be moral, but you can also be immoral. Again, going to the messiness of morality. So I guess then going into that question of how do I define morality, there has been a lot of literature within anthropology, and sort of that's had these sort of strict sort of structural functionalist views of what does it mean to be a moral person within like small village units. And there's a lot of research on the Quran that does that. This is what it means to be a good person. But I guess my argument is that like there is no one clear moral path. Of course we can make assessments like, killing someone is bad, but what about killing someone in the name of revolution? Is that bad? And I don't necessarily think Buddhists would argue that, but actually one of a really good friend of mine who grew up in a strong Buddhist community in Tamanya, and he was a devout Buddhist, had studied under Tamanya Sayadaw as a child, was always a vegetarian, and he is now leading a resistance armed group. And I think that again goes back to this, like people are constantly trying to unpack like what are these sort of structural models of how I'm supposed to be a good person, and then how do I personally navigate that through what do I see as the best sort of how can I be the best person in this particular situation? And it's never clear cut, you know. For young people, sometimes they want to support their parents by going to work in Thailand, but then they also feel this tension to, you know, support their own individual sort of aspirations or goals. And then I think your question about my reaction to, I guess, people in Hpa-an, their reaction to sort of the violence against the Rohingya in 2017. I guess it did shock me, but it didn't shock me after having spent so much time there. Like prior to 2017, people were always talking to me about Muslims. Like right from the first day I got there, they were warning me to be careful of Muslims. And I think I just found it such a, I don't know if it was confusing, but like Plong Buddhists are some of the most generous, hospitable people I've ever met in my life. They are always caring for certainly me, but other people in their community. And I just always found it really hard to, I guess, reconcile their views towards Muslim communities. And that doesn't mean it's not more complicated at the village level. And I agree with you, everyone has these tales, right, of these people kind of close themselves off from society. But I also think, I personally think a lot of what people said to me came from like social media. It came from the sermons of monks. It came from just like rumors. And I don't think a lot of it was actually based on personal experience. And I don't think that's just about, you know, Plong Buddhists in Hpa-an. I think we can see the same in Australia and in Denmark around like the other, right? And I don't think it's like a reflection of them as worse than any other community. I just think like within that particular context, the role, I think particularly of moral authorities like monks, play a really significant, they really influence how people they really influence how people sort of see and think about other community members. I don't know if, Mikael, if you had a particular question for me. I like have lots of thoughts to discuss generally about your... the role of women.
Yes. I would like to comment on the Muslim thing, because Ardeth said that they don't integrate. Perhaps not everywhere, but in Karen state, they act.
I said the people said.
Okay. Okay, but actually they call themselves Karen Muslims, and they speak only Pokaran.
Yeah.
And they are, well, they wear a scarf when they go to the mosque, but otherwise not. They are very similar to their Karen neighbors. But the monks, especially the Mabatha, evicted them, as I mentioned before. For example, also in a small town called Edu, they can still keep their shops, but they are not allowed to live there. And during the Rohingya crisis in 2017, there was this, I think you mentioned it, this Facebook rumor. And all Karen villages were urged to form groups of guards who'd stayed up during the night, because the Rohingya would invade the Karen state. Yes. And although people didn't believe in this, they were forced to do this by the monks. You also mentioned another monk, Ukavidasa, who he is now the Mabatha leader. Yes. And he is also very influential and a corrupt guy. But we were told about Virathu. He grew up in Hpa-an, or spent time.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think he had some fights with young Muslims. So of course their personal experiences, also of young Muslim men who probably are a little too eager to date a Korean woman. but I mean, we have all this kind of examples. There are so many of them. But what's going on here is a massive anti-Muslim propaganda, and it was supported by the military. U Thein Sein, the president, he paid to Mabata for the first conference. So, and we shouldn't underestimate this kind of propaganda circulating on the social media, especially Facebook.
Yeah, and I think, like I talk about also in the book, like for me it was hard to reconcile how a community that had long experienced violence from the state could now, I guess, see the military as the lead defenders of Buddhism. And that's not to say they didn't still look at them in, you know, in it wasn't necessarily a black and white view of the military, but it was particularly because of the influence of monks and the Mabata monks. There was a strong sense that, you know, the military actually could support Buddhism and the flourishing of Buddhism.
But these groups like Mabata, but also Chitu, who was actually one of Utusana's soldiers, yes, but became the border guard force leader. They form patron-client relationships, and there's a lot of money circulating there. As I said, I gave the example before, when you have to give a donation, an officer, for example, will go around to his soldiers, or a village leader, or Chitu, for example. They will collect the money, and huge amounts sometimes. And then they make huge donations for the monastery. They build a road, and Mabata had a clinic financed, and another network we met. They were very proud because they financed a wall the military were building in northern Rakhine state to keep the Rohingya out. And these networks destabilized the civilian government. And I think this was actually a preparation for the coup.
So much, Michael. And I think in the interest of time, and still having time for the wine reception afterwards, I think we'll open up the floor for some questions for Justine or the panelists, but maybe mainly Justine. But if there are some questions that you would like to address as well, please jump in. Yes, Jenny? Yes. Excellent, thanks. Yeah, that was the missing answer. And maybe we take Corinne as well, right?
Thank you so much for the great presentation on your book. I was just curious if you could talk a bit more about the playfulness, because I think it's such an interesting element of your research. And, you know, I'm just very curious. Could you talk a bit more about that? Thank you.
Zakaria?
Thank you very much, Justine. It was fabulous information we can gather from you. And I want to know, you have been there several times, then you have done very good research, and written a book. And it gives us a lot of information, but I wonder, how can we develop this morality to be how to say that, to have better future for the Myanmar? Do you have any idea? Thank you.
That's a difficult question. Can I add one? Yeah.
So this
this, I mentioned this in my comment about, do people pursue morality issue on daily basis, right? So for me, I'm Karen, but I grew up in the urban area. It was less of a concern for me. We talk about this, but it's not everyday things. So, and then I talked to Mikael, and he said, yeah, in those areas, it's like almost every day. So what distinguished the Korean communities from the rest of us, right? Because in my experience, we didn't talk about morality every day. So that, or even in other societies, right? So what is this unique thing about Korean Buddhist communities that made them talk about this, right? If that's the case, that it's like comes up in everyday interaction and conversation.
All right, I'm going to start with the question about gender. Thank you, Jenny. It is a very key, I think, part of the book as well, and I haven't really gone into it. But gendered understandings of morality are really important to how people live and act in the world. And particularly if we're talking about young women, they feel this constant tension of like, wanting to be, I guess, like modern and dance in, do Korean dance sessions with their friends and sing karaoke. But then they like go home to the village and they like wear more conservative clothing, and they want to keep themselves small, and they talk about, like, my friends would talk about speaking softly, and you shouldn't laugh too loud, and you shouldn't dance. And I think that this is like a huge part, but also, as Mikael was alluding to, I like, from what I like learned from people, women play a big role in terms of like the community's like morality, and particularly in relationship with like the non-human world. So if you are a young woman who, has sex out of wedlock, then, there are a lot of rituals in place so that you have to apologize to the sort of owners of the land or your household for engaging in those kinds of acts. And it can, create illness for your parents or for your community, but it can also mean the rice crops die that year. And as Mikael also said, like, I actually also was I've been working in a book in your community on the Thai-Myanmar border, and I'm also hearing those narratives a lot. The rice didn't grow this year because there was a young couple who had relations in the rice fields down there, and so then the spirits were angry and the rice didn't grow. So this is like not necessarily just about people in Hpa-an. But yeah, going back to gender, I also think men as well, there are certain roles that young men, older men feel like they have to fulfill, and same with older women as well. I mean, I could talk a lot about that, and my work now is increasingly moving more in that direction, because I think I was sort of a big part of this research again was to like bring out the voices of women who are not just defined again by sexual violence and conflict, but actually like, have stories and have lives and story and want to sort of tell a different kind of narrative. And I think that's really important as well. Corinne, to the question of playfulness, I did love this, and it's mostly, I think, something that I saw amongst young people in particular. This sort of like, again, like I was sort of saying about young women, how on the one hand they feel like they want to sort of play up to these roles of being a young, good woman, but then on the other hand, there's a lot of experimentation, and that's because I spent a lot of time with young people, university students. I saw a lot of that playfulness. And there is sort of an argument within anthropology that this is sort of part of the coming of age process, that, it's not just about young women in current state. It's like it's something that young people generally are, testing the boundaries of what does it mean to be good, or what does it mean to be, what are my aspirations, or, how should I behave in society? Am I going to upset my parents? But I really loved that playfulness. It's something that I talk about only in one chapter, but I think like it's a really important part of the story, because again, like I think there's such a clear narrative around what does it mean to be a young, good Korean woman, but actually when you spend time with people, they're often pursuing their own sort of ideas and aspirations. And I guess partly to what you were saying, Ardeth, like it's not like you think about morality every day, and I don't necessarily think people think about morality every day. I think older people are often, and I think that's part of my framing came from spending a lot of time with especially older grandmothers who were always talking to me about morality and always talking to me about the concerns they had about young women and young men and the decline of Buddhism, and monks these days aren't good, monks in the past used to be good. But I do think I saw these daily tensions coming up also amongst young people against mothers, with school teachers, with warden village administrators, of like, not necessarily like framing it like, am I a moral person, but more like, how do I navigate this situation? What is the best approach? How do I produce justice, as like Helene's work on everyday justice? I think it's not just about like there being strict interpretations of justice or morality or good. I think they're often sort of talking with people around them. They're learning from moral authorities or religious leaders or political leaders, but they're also kind of discerning their own course through that. The question of like, how can we develop morality, or how do we like create a better future for Myanmar? I definitely do not have the answers, and I would never say that I have the answers. I think Myanmar people have the answers. I think that they are already determining that destiny. They are already shaping that vision of the future. I mean, part of the reason I feel so hopeful about Myanmar is because of the people I spend time with. There are a lot of terrible sort of military leaders in Myanmar, but the majority of people you meet are so good, so kind, actually just like care for each other, care for the community, care for the nation, care for young people, care for elders. I don't think I've ever experienced such kindness and generosity as I have as being, certainly in Hpa-an, but just Myanmar generally. And I don't think it's a lack of morality in Myanmar. I think it's related to structures of power. I think it's the legacies of colonialism that continue to bear out today. I think it's related to issues related to land and how, you know, people are just struggling to survive, and there are a lot of people who I guess are interested in power and taking advantage of, I think, people's goodness actually. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I definitely, I don't think there is a lack of morality. I think if anything, the current revolutionary cause just shows us just like how determined people are to really fight for a better future, despite all the violence that they're experiencing right now.
The last round of questions, and I already have Mikael on. So anybody else, please put your hand up while Mikael is asking the question or commenting.
I forgot one very important aspect in the gender question. Women could not convert way back in the time when they sacrificed animals. And it's still so that women should not convert. If they marry a man from another denomination, the man should convert. And I've heard this among Catholics, Baptists, Buddhists, in many places in Thailand. I think the same is the case in Myanmar.
Yeah, I think generally within like the household and the community, women are seen as the moral bearers, right? And so therefore they should also continue the religious tradition, and in some ways it's kind of similar to the Jewish tradition. They want it to be passed down through the mother. But I do think like I think that even though sometimes there are these ideas, in reality a lot of people do intermarry. Like two of my closest friends, they were a Buddhist and Christian. He was Christian and she was Buddhist, and he was constantly trying to convince her to convert to Seventh-day Adventist Christianity. And she said, until you actually start following all the rules of Seventh-day Adventism, then I will not convert. So I think like in reality, actually, there are no strict rules. And that is the point of my book. Like there are always these ideas and narratives around what does it mean to be a good person. But actually, when you talk with people and you spend time with them, it's so much more complex. People often like go against their parents. I also met people who had married Muslims and they were really happy in their relationship. And they said, yeah, my dad was upset, but then he like, you know, got over it. But yeah, I think again, like there is no strict clear-cut way of being a moral person. Of course there are like ideas that we are told by society, and certainly Buddhism plays an influence, but I mean, as someone who doesn't necessarily ascribe to an institutional religion, I don't think that's necessarily about being Buddhist. I think it's about being human, and actually that we have human values, which means we don't want to kill and we don't want to disrespect our neighbor. And I think a lot of the conversations I heard amongst Buddhists, I also heard amongst Christians and Muslims as well. It's just that I focus on Buddhists in this book. Yeah.
Thank you so much to our amazing audience. Thank you to you online, and thanks to Justine.
Thanks, Helene.
And we're now really happy on behalf of my climate, our my climate, our climate. No, to invite you for a glass of wine, and I can see there's also some non-alcoholic out there and a bit of snacks. So please stay around, and please don't forget to purchase this amazing book that's lying out your neighbor if you want to save money, but also remember that a part of the payment goes to flood victims in, I think, Karen State, right?
Yeah, into to IDP communities on the Salween River, who the work of the Karen Peace Support Network are currently aiding victims who had their houses flooded, and the communities have been really devastated. So, yes, please buy a book. Thank you.
Thank you.